Fairfax, Delegate Sloan.
Speak to the Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be brief. We're already spent too much time on this as it is. But I think the gentleman from Salem is oversimplifying this. Fiscal impact statement. First of all, the gentleman is assuming that every single action brought by the Attorney General is going to result in a successful enforcement action. The reality is that every single act they investigate is not going to result in an action. And so there are going to be cases that are investigated, just like there are crimes that are investigated that do not result in civil actions, much less successful. Additionally, many times cases are brought and they're not successful. And so there might be cases brought where the time you spend it with accomplice doesn't recover their fees. Additionally, judges have attorney's fees all the time in cases. So the idea that every single prosecution can result in a case where the accomplice recovers $2,500 all their attorney's fees every single time is nonsense. That isn't how it works. The reality is there is uncertainty as to how much this will cost for the government to implement it. And just like many fiscal impact statements that I've had on my bills that I don't like because I don't think there's any uncertainty, it's just like that with this one. There's uncertainties, they put a number on it just in case there is an impact because it might take more staff to process it. I don't think this is a case of the governor not reading the bill. It's just the reality of the way we normally do things around here. And I urge the body to support the governor's amendment. Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Brunswick.
The gentleman from Fairfax, you have a question.
Gentleman from Fairfax, you have a question.
I yield.
Gentleman, yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment here says that the provisions of this act, and there are many of them, should not become effective unless an appropriation effectuating the purpose of this act is included in the General Appropriations Act passed in 2014 of the General Assembly that becomes law. Now, what amount is this specifying? Or is this just some indeterminate, undeterminate, amorphous, gossamer amount of money that is here?
Mr. Speaker, I would say to the gentleman that I would assume the number is whatever it says in the impact statement. Obviously, all these bills have the exact same language on them. I don't know what the Attorney General's office said. There's additional staff that need to process this, or whether they'll outsource it. But the language says what it says, and it's like that on every bill. And I don't see whether it has to be $1 or $1 million. The Attorney General's office said they need some money in order to enforce this, and the Appropriations Committee can hopefully find some money to deal with it.
Speaking with the gentleman, yield for that question.
Gentleman, yield. Gentleman, yield.
The amendment doesn't say effectuating part, some, many, or a few of the purposes of the act. Without qualification, it must therefore mean all the purposes of the act. Now, the Attorney General has an understanding, or at least he should have, as to what amount of money is needed. This is an open door to pickpocketing the general purse by an agency of this government without accountability to this body. Now, why would you want to have an unlimited, unknown amount of appropriations instead of a specific amount, which this does not have?
Mr. Speaker, I answer the gentleman by saying that's the way he feels. He'll just vote against all the governor's amendments with respect to these appropriation language, which I expect he's going to do anyway. So I'm just having a semantic argument for no reason. It's not the point that I raised in addressing the gentleman from Salem's question, which was whether or not this in fact does have a positive or negative impact. Mr. Speaker, I would just encourage the gentleman to vote his conscience.
Okay.
Gentleman has the floor addressing the.
Thank you. The one thing that we should be doing in appropriation bills is to have a little bit of precision and understanding of what we're doing. There is no precision here. There is no amount specified. There's no amount even contemplated. The gentleman who is a representative of the governor, at least one of his spokesmen on behalf of this, can't identify the money, which means he can't identify the real purpose of this. I would suggest there's another purpose of this, which has nothing to do with the orderly operation of government, but it's something to do with making points that are on some scoreboard somewhere, which have nothing to do with securing the common good. This is a political amendment that further diverts our attention from securing the common good for purposes that are merely partisan and do not serve the individual interests of citizens of Virginia. I urge this to be rejected. I would hope that the gentleman, the patron of the bill, will pass this notwithstanding the governor's federalist amendment.
Gentleman from Whiteville, Delegate Farrell.
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion.
Pending question is moved. Shall the bill be amended in accordance with the recommendation of the governor? Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes 27, noes 70.
Ayes 27, noes 70. The governor's amendment fails to pass.
Speaker, turning to page 8 of today's calendar. House Bill 377, act to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to billboard stop passed February 4th, and the governor's recommendation will apply to them.
Gentleman from Prince William, Delegate Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 377 simply clarifies legislation that we passed in the 2013 session that allows the billboard company to move a billboard back on the same property. When we're talking about movements only, we're not talking about the creation or erection of additional billboards in Virginia. This year, the House passed this bill with a bipartisan vote, 62 to 37. It passed the Senate with a large bipartisan vote. The gentleman from the 38th Senatorial District, Senator Puckett, carried an identical companion bill in his body, Senate Bill 295. It has already been signed by the governor with provisions in my original bill. It also respects the constitutional amendment we passed in 2012 to strengthen the rights of private property owners by an overwhelming vote margin of 3-1 at the ballot box. The amendment would require VDOT to consult with the mayor or chair of the board of supervisors, or VDOT makes a decision that those two individuals have nothing to do with condemnation litigation. Additionally, PML and Veto did not ask for the amendment. VDOT did not ask for the amendment. And the amendment is on line 13. This is an additional point. When the rest of the language dealing with adjusting the billboard or removing it is on lines 19, 20, and 21. So I would respectfully urge the House to reject the amendment, allow the litigation, the legislation as it passed the General Assembly to become law, and so that it also matches identically the same provisions and language in Senator Puckett's companion bill.
Gentlewoman from Hampton, of the board.
Yes, speaking to the governor's recommendations.
Gentlewoman is the floor.
Yes, thank you. The governor's recommendation simply directs the commissioner of VDOT to consult with the local government on how best to relocate the billboard. Before this amendment, the bill reduced the local government's power to regulate billboards along highways within their boundaries. And with this amendment, it simply gives the localities the ability to offer input to the commissioner on how best to relocate the billboard to conform as closely as possible to local ordinances. And this is why I move that we accept the governor's recommendation.
Shall the bill be amended in accordance with the recommendation of the governor? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 29, noes 67.
Ayes 29, noes 67. The governor's amendment fails to pass.
Continuing to page 1, page 8, Article 403, an act of Veto, Virginia, relating to the commission of slaughter sex offenses to the evidence in child sex crime cases. Passed the House of Representatives and introduced by the House of March, the governor's recommendation is before the body.
Gentleman from Albemarle, Delegate Bell.
Mr. Speaker, it's analysis of the technical amendment to release the word act and replace it with the word section. The budget of the House and pass it.
Shall the bill be amended in accordance with the recommendation of the governor? Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes 96, noes 0.
Ayes 96, noes 0. The amendment passes.
House Bill 492, an act of
Shall the bill be amended to make Delegate Alba vote? Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes 96, noes 1.
Ayes 96, noes 1. The amendment passes.
Turning to page 9 of the calendar, House Bill 606, an act of amendment to reenact several sections of Virginia
6 was the bill that authorized the number of judges in statute for June 421. It also changed the numbers of courts in the National Center for State Courts report that was conducted through the Supreme Court. I would move that we reject the governor's amendment based on the reasons that he expressed. So,
Shall the bill be amended in accordance with the recommendation of the governor? Gentleman from Manassas, Delegate Miller.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is related to the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act. I think there's a slight misunderstanding in the governor's staff of what he did. Some of the parties involved in the staff, the governor's office has requested that we reject. I would agree with the governor's office that we now reject.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, the gentleman is absolutely correct. I think the governor would like us to reject the amendment, and I hope that we can.
Shall the bill be amended in accordance with the recommendation of the governor? Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes, 0, noes, 96.
Ayes, 0, noes, 96. The governor's amendment fails to pass.
Turning to page 10 of the House. Page 10, House Bill 650, an act to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia related to exemptions for the requirements of the voting safety education for passed House February 10th, 2008, under recommendation is for the like now.
Gentlewoman from Westmoreland, Delegate Ransom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would request that we sever the amendments to justify government.
I think the gentlewoman then probably wants to take the 3 technical amendments, 1, 2, and 3 in the block.
Yes, sir.
Separate that before.
That's
Okay,
correct.
you want to accept 1, 2, and 3.
That is correct. I would ask that we accept the first 3 amendments and explain those amendments. Those amendments are on line 35 and 37. I agree with the recommendations of the governor, so I appreciate the support of the working watermen in Virginia. They are technical in nature. I would ask that we accept those in the line.
If we're going to do amendments 1, 2, and 3 in block, shall the bill be amended? Those,
Mr. Speaker, over here.
I'm sorry, Delegate Settles. What am I going to do? Delegate Settles.
Thank you very much. I live in Frank County, is one place. I'd like to ask the gentleman a question, because I can't pull this up on my system here.
Gentleman, yield for a question.
Absolutely.
And that's just because I can't find it. We can briefly change, explain what the 3 amendments are.
And the technical amendments include clam and oyster aquaculture harvesters. So this includes anyone that is currently registered in the Commonwealth as watermen and are currently reporting to the New York State seafood landing licenses.
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor of amendments 1, 2, and 3, the governor's amendment, okay, please vote yes and clear. Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes, 95, no 0.
The noes 95, excuse me, ayes 95, noes 0. Those amendments on the block pass. Okay, now we're on the separate amendment, amendment number 4. Gentleman from Westmoreland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fourth amendment strips the legislation of the conference committee report that was agreed upon by the House and the Senate with bipartisan support, and I would request that we reject the governor's amendment.
Gentleman from Caroline, Delegate Oron.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, let's be clear about what the governor's amendment does. And that is, it restores the bill, amendment number 4, restores this bill to the fashion it passed the House on February 10th by a vote of 98 to nothing. There was absolutely no opposition to this measure when it did not have this language in the bill. The controversy underlying this is gets down to the fact that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have two different worlds as it relates to our waterways. We have the world of the bay and the large streams, and we have our inland waterways. And unfortunately, we have tried to address the safety needs of both through our legislative policy. I'll be the first to admit to this body and the general patron of this measure that this is not a perfect solution. But I would further say to this body, if you believe the policy effective in 2007, where we as a matter of public policy said we are going to require voter safety instruction, then you want to support amendment number 4. Additionally, given the fact that with this exclusion, if you take out the governor's proposed amendment, you are saying simply by the fact that I'm 45 years old or more, and have owned any type of motorboat for 6 years or more, I can forevermore operate any type of motorboat. If I operated a John boat with a motor for 6 years, I can now, because I won the lottery, go buy a cabin cruiser and have at it, with no further restriction. The impetus of the legislation in 2007 was caused by a boating accident where the operator was over the age of 45. If you look at the statistics, which fortunately they're not large, because I think it's a proof that the boating safety program is working, but the accidents that are occurring in Virginia in recent history, over half of those accidents are people aged 45 and older. Bottom line, if you feel that because you're 45 and own some motorboat for 6 years, you're inherently safe, reject the governor's amendment. But if you feel that boating safety is more critical than that, if you believe that a free online boating safety class is too onerous, reject the governor's amendments. But if you believe in public safety, you will support the governor's amendment. I hope the body will accept amendment number 4.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Southern Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to
Gentleman answer the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I wanted to share with you all a very personal story from a constituent of mine that I hope will put a real face to why it is that voter education and safety is so important in Virginia, even for people who are 45 years and older. In the year 2003, I was run over by a power boat under the sober command of a 68-year-old man. He had never taken a boating safety course. I was sucked into the boat's propeller and suffered 14 propeller strikes to my left side of the body. My injuries include the loss of my left arm, severe damage to my leg, shattered ribs, collapsed lung, partially detached left breast, loss of my left kidney, damage to my back, neck and spine, and partial blindness, and permanent scarring to my entire left side. I am now on disability and can only work 18 hours per week. I am in constant pain and will need many more operations in the future. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I love the water very much, and I love the boat. But I also want to protect my family and keep them safe. Virginia's voting education program allows us to do both of those, and I hope for that reason we'll accept the governor's amendment. Thank you.
Gentleman from Bedford, Double Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the governor's amendment.
Gentleman answer the floor.
Thank you. I rise in support of the governor's amendment. We had this discussion several times during the session, and I just one last opportunity to convey to everyone, as the patron of the bill back in 2007, how important we felt it was at the time to put safety standards in place for voting. For those of us who represent regions where voting is primarily done for recreation, the governor's amendment are an important and necessary change. They keep in place reasonable, minimal requirements for voter education that will keep our waterways safe. You know, in 2009 to 2013, almost 50% of the accidents involved were 45 years or older. But the thing that I think I really need to spend a few minutes talking about, because we
hearing a lot in regards to trying to resolve in our mind what government's responsibility is and what in the name of freedom is. And I'm a big freedom talker on the House floor too, and I very much believe that government should have as limited a role in our lives as possible. However, it took me a while to get a grasp around this too. Stories like we just heard, I heard multiple ones while we were putting the legislation in place. Stories in my own district at Smith Mountain Lake, wonderful couple and their dogs that actually were victims of a fatality on our lake. A very dear friend of mine whose brother, over 45 years of age, was decapitated in an accident. Just things you don't ever want to think about happening to you, your family. We don't know. I mean, it's our responsibility to look at public safety and determine when it's government's responsibility. And we look at this issue every year. The Courts of Justice Committee looks at all different things dealing with that. We have licenses that we put in place to protect people on the roadways. You know, where there's lines, there's things that we don't have in the water. We don't have lines, we don't have speed limit signs, we don't have stoplights. We have nothing but recreational water that is public water that people have the freedom to enjoy. But it's our responsibility when lives start getting endangered that we make sure that we put measures in place so that they can have the responsibility to still use that knowledge to operate that boat properly. You know, I've heard it said that freedom is in the eye of the beholder. But with freedom comes responsibility. And responsibility is something that I think is a critical function when it regards to public safety for all of us. 45 states have requirements for boating safety. We have a National Safe Boating Week because it's something that should be recognized nationally. Boating education saves lives. Too many lives have been lost. So the important policy measure we're looking at today is not whether or not someone is old enough to understand how to just operate a boat. The understanding needs to be, do people have the education knowledge that they need to protect others while they're out enjoying the waterways? I hope you will support the governor's amendments to this bill.
Gentleman from Acton, Watson.
Speaker, I'm authorized to speak against rejecting them.
John.
In my orders, we share Pennsylvania from Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. We don't put the restrictions, or they don't put the restrictions on their people like we do ours. But in my 40 years voting, most of all the actions I've seen are either self-imposed or mechanical. So I rise to speak against the thing. I don't think any class that you take will fix the problem of self-imposed or mechanical.
Gentleman from Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak to the merits. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak to the merits of the process and how this bill got before in this form. I mentioned before to you that I work for a company that can build bridges and tunnels, work on the water, everything we have is flows. We take safety so seriously. You get fired if you don't wear your seatbelt in your truck. We have continual lessons teaching people or relearning things that they learned the first day on the job. And we continually do that because it is a fact that when you get older, you think you know everything. You think I've done some things, I know what I'm doing. But it is so important to go back to the basics when you go to work every day in a dangerous environment. And when you're on the water, as General Lake says, you're in a dangerous environment, a very dangerous environment. This is not a restriction. This is something that is intended to help you make conscious decisions. You might recall 6 months or so ago, a wedding party was out in the boat in the Hudson River, ran right into construction equipment, killed the members of the wedding party, and just the kind of equipment that my company owns and operates. But as a matter of process, before us right now, if a commitment has not been made by the Veto Distill to reject any further amendments to the bill. I asked the committee, if we accept this exemption just for the watermen, and really, they would get an exception if they were my company. They would be learning this stuff, they would be trained all the time. They would be fired if they went off any protocol that they learned. But nevertheless, we voted for that because it was just limited to the people that are professionals in their industry. But the bill got to the floor here with the amendments back on it. Now, our word means a lot here. What does it mean to all of you when you make a commitment? I'm not going to accept any of this bill if we agree to vote for it like this. So we have the bill back now in its original form, and as the gentleman from Carolina said, not in the form that passed this House. So I would urge the body to accept the governor's recommendation.
Gentleman from Campbell, Delegate Ferris.
Rise to speak.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, while we were gone on break, I learned something very interesting. A client called me and said, hey, I've got a houseboat sitting out the lake. I want you to come up, spend the evening with us. We're going to cook the steaks and Prince and I knew this boy didn't have a houseboat. And I said, goodness, where'd you get this houseboat? He said, oh, I rented it. I said, you did? He said, yeah. I said, I went over to this place, walked up, watched a 30-minute video, and they rented me a houseboat. I said, who's driving? He said, I'm driving. I said, okay. So I went on my car, still like cooked the big steak. And this guy had never taken any safety courses, never done anything. He had a huge houseboat, driving around the lake to run over anybody to do anything, and we want to legislate here that the citizens that own boats and operate them for 6 years now have to take a safety course in order to drive a boat, but we're letting people do things like my friend did last week. I really hope that we'll reject the governor's amendment.
Gentleman from Powhatan, Delegate Ware.
Speak to the amendments. And now that I have your attention, I would just remind you, I've spoken against the things that related to the governor's amendment before. I want to remind you that when it comes to life anecdotes and the minimum statistics, as interesting as they may be, and as heart-tugging as they may be, don't carry the day. They don't make cases. It is our decisions that make those decisions, make the case in regard to this legislation. I want to remind you that safety courses, no matter how well written, how well intended, don't save people from accidents. It's the decisions that they make, driving a boat, driving a motorcycle, whatever it may be, that decide whether or not there's going to be injuries or even more serious things that happen. For that reason, a variety of states do a variety of things. And even if we take this in the way that it's left with the conference committee report, we will have by far the strictest, most restrictive licensing of people driving boats on the entire East and Gulf Coasts. I want you to think about New York State, the Finger Lakes, Lake Champlain, Great Lakes, and so on. It's got frontage on the Atlantic Ocean, Long Island Sound, and so on and so forth. In New York, you have to take this case, this kind of a test, if you are, this kind of preparation, if you are 14 and younger. In Florida, which has the longest coastline on this whole part of the country, in Florida, you've got to be under the age of 26 to have to do it. In Virginia, if this passes, it's 45 and younger. After 6 years of registration, we will have by far the most restrictive, even with this in any form. I hope that you will not go any stricter than what we've done today, and that you will join with the gentlelady and reject the governor's amendment. small either way. You cannot attribute them directly to the voter safety. So I think the premise of this question is fundamentally sound.
Gentleman from Prince Williams, Washington.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentlelady from the 22nd District resume the floor for a question?
John, I think, Dr. Byron, yes. Assume the floor for a question. Gentleman yield.
Yes, I do.
Gentleman yield.
So you're not really supposed to mention your name.
Hang on, sorry. Thanks for the help.
Mr. Speaker, the gentlelady represented, and I take her figures as accurate, and others did the same, that half of the accidents involved people who were commanding the vote that were 45 and over. But I noted the absence of another statistic that is often associated with voting accidents. How many of these involve alcohol or drugs?
I'm not going to deny that there isn't tragedies everywhere dealing with alcohol and people using alcoholic beverages while they're operating the boat. But they certainly are not all. I don't have the statistic on which were alcohol, which were not. As far as I'm concerned, one life that we saved, especially if it was my child, was going to matter on the lake.
Further questions, Steve?
Gentleman yield for further question.
I am.
Gentleman yields.
I don't dispute that every life is precious and made God's image and has inherent value. But we're here to make a public policy determination on causative factors that would result in regulation that is kind of unprecedented on the East Coast. So I'm trying to find out, is it age or is it alcohol, because it's more accessible to people that are 45 and over. And that's all I'm trying to find out.
I would say to the gentleman that any time that someone can be educated on how to operate and what the laws of the waterway are, so a person knows how to properly navigate and all the other things, would certainly serve them better than someone that doesn't have that knowledge. The same as operating on a roadway or operating an airplane or anything else that you have to get instruction before you are able to go out and use those public areas.
I thank the gentleman.
Gentleman from the right, like Carol.
Speaking to the
Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the governor's amendment for, I hear a lot of people talking on both sides. It becomes clear to me there's a bigger issue here about how we're regulating tidal, other water for multi-state drivers. Boats are coming and going. People standing up represent landlocked bodies of water, lakes, where many retirees come who are, yes, over the age of 45. And yes, I agree. We probably should look at our regulations and requirements, especially for those who live on the vast waterways such as the Chesapeake Bay, which many people advocate against this amendment represent. But I ask you, let's look at that in another bill and in a bigger policy discussion next year. Don't do it at the expense of our people on the lake safety. That's what this question is about right now. Yes, we should look at the regulations, but you're asking us to do it at our expense, and it flies in the face of everything our constituents on these lakes want. Let's be more comprehensive about this. Let's understand that there's a vast difference between where we represent and where some of the people against reject, or who are for rejecting this live and represent. Please don't do it at the expense of our Speaker. Let's bring this back next year.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Manassas, Charlie Jackson.
Will the gentleman from Henrico yield for a question?
Gentleman yield for a question.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Franklin, California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House.
Joe, like to see the gentleman.
I'd like to speak to the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I would look forward to this amendment that come back because this is contrary to the way this bill left this House. And the way we sent it out of here through our own committee, and I looked at that fully. But the fact is that it is said all that. What we have is too many humans, too many votes, and when we get to that point, you know me, I'm not much for regulation, okay? But we're at the point on our inland waters where we simply have to have tools to address the problems that citizens that are using the lakes have. These courses have been successful. If you're going to vote to reject this amendment, you're voting against numbers, and you're voting against lives, you're voting against property, you're voting against children. I would urge you to accept the government's amendment. We need further work, especially if House votes and states on, we can look at that next year. But right now, we simply need to accept the governor's amendment and move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Scott. We remind you of Amendment 4 of HB 650. Shall Amendment 4 be passed in accordance with the recommendation of the governor?
Red for freedom. Freedom reigns.
Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes 40, noes 55.
Ayes 40, noes 55, and 4 fails to pass.
Continuing on page 10, House Bill 791, an act of amendment to reenact federal sections of Virginia relating to the Constitution and Harmony Voters Association Act. Rule enforcement as the House Chairman Rivers comes from up by the House March 7 governor's recommendation to be the order on
Gentleman from Fairfax, Delegate Lyon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House, although the form of the governor's amendment is substitute the recommendation is straightforward and clarifying in nature and comes to us recommended by the Division of Legislative Services. So we're only 82 members to vote for on final passage. Still be okay. We're only 15 again. This probably isn't going to help too much. The purpose of the amendment is to conform the bill to existing code, which states that homeowners and condo associations have access to court as a matter of law, not due to provisions in their governing documents. You may recall that the principal purpose of the bill was to specify that HOA and condo boards can get injunctive relief in general district court, not just in circuit court. The two changes in the bill to call your attention to are line 56 and 58. Conforming change in 107 to 109. This is not new language. It's a sentence that has been moved from a paragraph, 3 paragraphs above in each case. There are no other changes that have been made to the bill, and I would be the pleasure of the body to adopt the governor's recommendation.
Gentleman from Scott.
Mr. Speaker, some of us voted against this initially. It's not coming up with a minute. If we wish to be consistent, this is for final passage. We should still vote no. Thank you.
The gentleman from Wyden, Public Comment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the HOA bill again. Version 5, if I recall. There was version 1 through 3, and the last vote we voted during session, supposedly the bill was fixed, we were told. There's problems with it, it's fine, now it's fixed. It seems it wasn't fixed, because now is the fix. But what you're voting for a new substitute, not just an amendment, a full substitute. So this is your chance to vote with the people again. And vote against these amendments. Bottom line, whether fixed or not, changing the line from here or not, this is not the issue. Is this a power grab or is it not? Yes, it is. Additional powers to the HOAs. Based on this bill, the final vote, the one that will recount, which you're going to vote on today, This gives the HOAs the power to go to general district court and be able to sue their citizens for minor infringements. Powers that they